Hello and welcome to our weekly IG Live. Today we are doing a redo. Those of you that watch regularly might remember when we had Maria Wen Adcock on. She's a new author. Well, I say new, actually has been writing for quite some time. But we had a lot of technical problems, so we invited Maria to come back on because we thought it was such a great interview. We wanted to make sure you all got to enjoy it. Hello.
Hello, there we go. We are all set.
Yeah, you look lovely, and I love your setup back there.
Thank you. Yes, I have my book too as well.
How are you?
I am doing well, and here we are on round two of Makeaway Media's interview with me. So I'm hopeful for this one. No tech issues this time.
Yes, well, it looks like it's going well so far, so I think it's going to be great. And I was just saying it was such a great interview that we wanted to make sure people got to enjoy it because it was interesting, like we're talking about about, of course, your book and why it's important to have representation in children's books. And then the other side is just your own personal journey as an author, what it's like to write for for a series like Curious George and to be a part of something that's so iconic. So I think from the author side, plus as far as the bigger picture side, it was just a really interesting interview, which is why we wanted to make sure that we got you back on here. So thank you for making time for that.
Of course, I'm excited to be here.
Well, for those that didn't see it last time, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and your new book?
Great. So my name is Maria Wen Adcock, and I am the author of the new book, It's Chinese New Year, Curious George, which came out last month. And it was just in time for Chinese New Year, which recently wrapped up last Sunday. But as we know, every year it falls on a different date because it's based on the moon cycle. So this year it was in January, next year it's in February. So I'm excited about this book and sharing it and just representing Chinese culture, something that I didn't see when I was growing up, and it's something I wish I had seen. So I'm hoping that with my books, that today's generation, they'll be able to find more books that are inclusive, with characters that look like them. But even if you don't look like the character, at least children can be aware of the world around them outside of where they currently live.
Yes, and I know that's something you've talked about why it's so important to have Curious George celebrate a holiday like Chinese New Year. One, like you said, is for Chinese kids or Chinese American kids. It's a way for them to see themselves reflected and their holiday celebrated. And for other kids, he's really modeling respectful curiosity about other cultures. So can you talk a little bit about what it was like to be a part of this series, how you got approached, and then something I think a lot of us think about is for something like Curious George, there's such consistency across all of their books, and yet they have so many different authors involved. How did they kind of get that, overall consistency to his books, even, for you? How did they make sure that their tone was really consistent throughout?
Yes. So I was really excited to be part of this franchise because I grew up with Curious George, and my two children did too. So I was very familiar in terms of writing the book. Because I was familiar, it was like not that hard. I knew the character, Curious George. He's always kind-hearted. Maybe he gets in trouble once in a while, but it's never because he's being malicious. It's just because he's curious, just like the children out there who are curious. And it's something we want to encourage. Now, in terms of how I got involved with this book, so I have a literary agent, and the publisher who makes these Curious George board books, they approached my agent as well as other agents to see if they had a writer who knew about the holiday. So the publisher already had about 15 years worth of tab board books that covered all the other holidays that you would have thought of. Christmas, Halloween, Easter, and so forth. So they wanted to expand to holidays beyond what they've already done. And so my agent said, hey, I know an author who knows about Chinese New Year. She has that lived experience. I then had to submit samples of what I would write. The publisher really liked it and said, hey, we want you to complete the book. So that's how that came about. And in terms of the consistency, it is really about knowing who the character is And I also saw samples of the other books that were tab board books to make sure that I was writing something in a consistent style.
And I have to say, I was really impressed. Like you said, they were looking for somebody who had that experience. And from what I remember, the illustrator also is, I can't remember if she's Chinese or but she's Asian, right? The illustrator.
Yes.
And that they allowed you the opportunity to kind of review and to make sure all the details were accurate, because there's so many things, like so many important symbolism in Chinese New Year, that I remember one thing you mentioned. Can you talk a little about why this illustration was so important, and that you actually kind of did some back and forth to make sure it was correct?
Yes. This illustration is the first page of the book. And so in here, Chinese New Year has not started yet. Originally, there was a full moon here. And so what I caught was that the full moon does not take place until the end of Chinese New Year, which lasts 15 days. So there's no way you could have a full moon before it started. So I pointed that out, and so they changed it to a crescent. So it's really understanding the holiday so that you can catch these nuances.
Yeah, and such little details. And I should also point out that, you know, we're talking about this as a board book, it's very sturdy and it's appropriate for younger children because, of course, they love Curious George. It has really beautiful pictures. They're going to, you know, it's not the amount of information isn't overwhelming, but this is something that will grow with them because it really has much more information. I know you talked about the word count, and this is really more what you would expect in a picture book than a board book, which is, they're usually much simpler. So this is actually something that would be appropriate for older kids as well. It just has so much information and really a lot of detail about a lot of different aspects of Chinese New Year.
That is right. So all of the Curious George tab book board books are all in the same format. So what they required me as a writer to do is on each of the tabs, there would be 4 stanzas of rhyme, 4 lines each, so 16 total. And this book has over 500 words in it, which is more typical of a picture board word count. And this is something that they have always done. So even though it's not a typical board book word count, they wanted to keep it consistent with their 15 years worth of books in this series.
And I think it's nice too, because it is something that you know, older kids would enjoy reading too. I mean, even older kids like Curious George. So I think that's great to have something for older kids.
Yes. When I've done school visits, it's been all the way to 5th graders, and they are just as engaged because we're teaching about Chinese New Year traditions with Curious George, which everyone loves, and anyone can learn about the traditions of the holiday. It doesn't need to be just like babies or toddlers. It can go up to the older children as well.
And can we talk about that? Because you have done a lot of school visits. You've had like a book lunch party. What has that experience been like you? Because this is, as I mentioned at the beginning, you've actually been writing for a long time, but this is your first published book. So the first time you've been able to do that kind of event. What is that like to go to the schools, to meet with kids? Like, what kind of reaction have you gotten at your visits?
Yes, this is my first published book, although I have been writing for over 10 years, but it's a long process. So in terms of the school visits, this is my first time doing school visits. I also did a book launch event at the library where I worked, and there's a lot of planning involved. There's a few things. I'm involved with SCBWI, which is the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and they talk a lot about not only writing your manuscript, but doing school visits and so forth. So I had some idea about what to expect, and I also know a lot of authors. So before I actually went to the schools, I did talk to a few authors about their experience, because this book itself, it's a board book, it's a children's book. If I read it straight through, it wouldn't take that long. But usually when you do a book reading for a school visit, you don't want to just read the book. You want to actually talk about the illustrations, talk about the meaning behind, like, okay, for cleaning before Chinese New Year, that is a tradition because that means you're sweeping out the bad luck to allow good luck in. So you want to provide more depth. So my presentation for this book is actually half an hour. And that's because I'm also teaching along the way about the traditions of the holiday as well as going through the lines of the book.
And that must be so gratifying to, you've written this book and to actually interact with the kids who are reading the book. And I know you post a lot on your social media. If anybody's not following her, be sure to do that. Bicultural Mama. She has a lot of great content on there. And it's so neat to see all these kids who are enjoying the book. That must be such an amazing feeling for you.
Yes, it is. And actually, I have a separate Facebook page that's specific for my authorship. And so I post all of my events there. And that's Maria Wen Adcock, author. And what I do is I've done big assemblies, like 150, 175 students at a time. And I really love that interaction. And that's the thing, when you do your presentations, especially for young kids, it can't just be like talking to them. You really need to get engaged. So I ask a lot of questions. I ask them about like, who knows what kind of animal Curious George is? And they say, monkey! What kind of sound does a monkey make? And they're like, ooh, ah, ah, ah. So you get them really involved and excited. And I do that throughout the presentation, asking them questions. I talk about long life noodles, for example, as a traditional Chinese New Year food. And I'll ask them, who likes noodles? Of course, everyone raises their hands. So these are just some techniques that we do to engage the children.
I love it. Those are great tips. And I was wondering if we could take a step back and talk about your journey as an author and other tips you might have for somebody who's wanting to, because I think it's good for people to know how long it actually takes, and that it's okay if they want to write and maybe it seems like it's taking a long time, not to be discouraged, because that's pretty normal. And especially, I know you've talked about it, it's like you've had kids, you had another career, like there are other things going on in your life in addition to just the fact that publication itself takes a long time. Could you talk a little about what your journey was and maybe some tips? Like I know you said how important it was for you to have an agent.
Yes. So since I was a kid, I knew I wanted to write a book. I just didn't know how to actually do that. It's a very high concept, like how do you actually go from writing something and then it appears in a store? So it was something that I tucked away in the back of my head, and I went on with life like many of us. We have our career, we have our families, and writing was just always kind of there. And I was involved in careers that were related to it. For example, I worked in publishing, but on the magazine marketing side, not on the editorial side, but I was close. So what happened was eventually when I had my first child and I had this long commute into New York City, I decided that I wanted to pull back from corporate life so I could raise my child, spend more time with her, and that's when I decided to go into writing. And I started out as a freelance writer. I started my blog, Bicultural Mama, and then I started writing manuscripts. Now, a lot of people have the misconception that, oh, writing a children's book is so easy, you just write a story and that's it. Well, the thing is, editors and agents are looking for specific things. They're looking for a story arc. They're looking for word count. There's a lot to the craft that you don't know about unless you actually learn about it. So you may think you have a great book like I did in the beginning, and then I got all these rejections. I'm like, oh my gosh, dozens and dozens of rejections. I didn't have an agent at that time. And then I started going to workshops and conferences about children's book writing, and I learned, oh, these are the things the agents and editors are looking for. They're the gatekeepers. So if you're not doing them, you're not going to get through. So once I started to learn that, I changed my writing and I got better at it. And also, I joined the SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which most authors I know who are children's authors belong to that. They offer tons of workshops. They're international. So there's probably a chapter near you. They're international, national, and they have workshops. They bring in agents and editors. So if you go to one of their workshops, you're usually able to submit to them, and you're not in that slush pile, because you went to the event. You will get priority. And that's not always the case, but a lot of times it is. So there's a lot of benefits to that. And the other thing I found helpful was belonging to a writing critique group, because hearing someone else's perspective of your story is often different from your own because you're too close to it. And sometimes things that you just know because it's your story, other people are like, this doesn't make sense. It's not clear to me. And you realize, oh, it's not clear to people who are hearing this for the first time. So it's always good to vet your book that way. So next, the agent versus no agent. Having the agent definitely helps if you are interested in traditional publishing, which means the publisher prints your book. The publisher pays you. The publisher, helps with the distribution and the marketing. But having an agent is really hard to find too. That took me many, many years because the agent has to look through your stuff and decide that they want to work with you and develop your career. So you actually have to have many manuscripts ready because even if they like one, guaranteed they will ask you, do you have more? We want to see more. And then you have to have that ready up front, and then they will decide if they want to work with you. So that is something I did not know at first. You have to have several ready to present. And then once I had the agent, that opened up a lot of opportunities because most of the publishers, especially the top 5, the big 5 is what they're called, they won't even look at your manuscript unless you have an agent because they want you to be vetted first. When you have the agent has contact information at all these publishing houses, and then they send it out for you and manage that. And the thing is, these editors will look at it because it's being sent by an agent. So that is how I got this opportunity with the Curious George book. And then, of course, there's people who do self-publishing, which is fine, too. I know a lot of people do that, and a lot of people have success. There are pros and cons. The pro is you don't have to wait for years. If you are willing to pay to print for your book, you can get it done pretty quickly. Of course, the con is that you have to do everything yourself. You have to pay for your book. You have to manage your distribution. You have to do all your own marketing. So there's a time factor to that as well. So it depends on your personal circumstances, which way you want to go.
And can you talk a little bit more about actually finding an agent? Because I know you said that took quite a long time. So how did you actually get an agent?
So traditionally, the way you would get an agent is you would pitch them. There are templates you can look online about how to pitch to an agent. Usually you have your story, you do the introduction, you talk about what kind of book it is. Is it a picture book, a young adult book, a middle grade, how many words it is. Then you do a summary of what this book is about, but you don't want to give away everything. You need to keep things concise. Then you talk about yourself, and then you send it out and hope that you hear back. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you do, but it takes 6 months. Sometimes you never even hear back, so you don't even know if they got it. And it's a very frustrating process for the author, and you need to have a lot of patience. But what has happened in the last few years is that with technology, there are different ways to approach an agent. And one way is through Twitter pitch parties, is what they're called. And that's actually how I found my agent. So if you look online, you can search for Twitter pitch parties, basically. And things will come up saying, on this day, use this hashtag, and agents and editors will be looking at that hashtag, and you tweet your pitch. So you have to say what the name of the book is, what it's about. It has to have a good hook. And a lot of times there's rules around it, like you can only pitch, one book every 4 hours or something like that. There's rules. And there's hundreds and hundreds going through, like literally every second. And you're like, oh my gosh. So part of it is luck. That does the agent and editor happen to see your tweet at the very moment that you tweeted it out. And part of it is, if they do see it, do they like it? If they like it, they click on the heart. And what that means is that you can submit to them. They are interested. So that's a huge thing. Oh, I got a heart. And sometimes you hear back from them, and sometimes you don't. But in my case, I did hear back. And then I was immediately asked, what else do you have? I sent my other manuscripts, and then the agent said, okay, let's do a call. I want to see if we're a fit. Then you do the personality fit and make sure you're on board with the same goals, because agents don't want to work with someone who wants to just do one book, because it's their career too. They want to develop someone. So they want someone who wants a career in book writing and will write multiple books. So once we established we had a fit and we had the same goals, then she offered representation. And then you sign a contract, and then you go from there.
Oh, that's so interesting. And I'm also curious because I know a lot of authors, especially diverse authors, they're hesitant to get involved with traditional publishing because, like you said, there are these gatekeepers, and they're worried that they will either explicitly or maybe implicitly be kind of pressured to change their stories or their topics. And that's why a lot of them turn to self-publishing, because they want to make sure that they still have full control over their manuscript. And so I know that's something that people are trying to be careful if they are going the route of traditional publishing. So much depends on the agent. So was that something that you were kind of had in mind? Because I think you had talked before about how you can look and see which agents you want to pitch to. Is that something you were thinking about?
Yes. I mean, in the case with my agent, she actually came to me, and then I looked her up and saw what kind of book she represented and who she was representing. And I saw that she did have diverse authors, and she actually stated that in her profile. She was looking for lots of different kinds of stories. So I thought, okay, we're on the same page, and she would be supportive. And in that case, the agent knows which editors are looking for what type of books. So in my book, like in this case, is a Chinese New Year book, but I also write other manuscripts that all have to do with Asian culture or Chinese culture. My agent will specifically find editors who she knows are open to those type of books. And so that helps a lot.
Right. So if you have the right agent, then they can kind of help you get into the right.
So you have to find, yes, you have to find the right agent. There are ways you can look them up. So there is something called Query Tracker. I don't know if it's .com or .net, but it's free. And you can actually sign up and see all the different agents that exist. And you can find their contact information and what they represent. People give feedback about them too. So that is one way to do it. Another way is if you see a book that you like and you wonder, like, oh, I wonder, who printed it or who wrote it. Usually if you look up the author, somewhere on the internet, they probably mention their agent. And you can try to pitch that agent if you feel that person is a fit for you.
That's a good point. I think I have seen that a lot of times, that they'll even say it in their Twitter profile or somewhere on their website. The author will mention who they're represented by. Yeah. I hadn't thought too much about that, other than I noticed it was on there.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any to wrap up? I know you have things that you're working on, or can you tell us a little bit about what's coming next for you? I know there's not too much you can say because there's that whole process of getting things done, but just the kind of things like, I know you talked about whether you're going to do picture books or middle grade, or what your future goals are.
My main focus is on picture books at this time, and they all have a multicultural aspect. It's what I know. It's kind of my niche. I have my site, Bicultural Mama, so I've always been in that world of multiculturalism, so it's a natural fit. I have something that will be announced hopefully soon, but I can't officially announce it yet because it needs to be announced by the publisher first. And they usually don't announce it until they find an illustrator. Mm-hmm. So we're in that process now where they may accept your book, but they need to find an illustrator, because you as an author, if you're going through traditional publishing, you don't pick the author. The company does, the publishing company does. Yeah. So then once they have that, then they announce it to the industry, and then you are free to tell the world yourself.
Well, that's so exciting. I can't wait. So we will be watching for that. Thank you for taking the time to come back on here, because I think you have said, the book itself is so wonderful, and you have so many great tips for people who are thinking about going into writing. So thank you for sharing. And if you haven't checked out her book yet, you really should. It's Chinese New Year, Curious George. It's a really beautiful book that's packed with a lot of information. So thank you for joining us again.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. It was really an honor.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.